There's more to prepping than just purchasing and storing. Skills and knowledge are an important part of prepping that many overlook. Hey guys, it's Jara with Wicked Prepared. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. We believe it's important to be well-rounded in your preparedness. Never put all your eggs in one basket, as they say, when it comes to prepping. Storing food is vitally important, but if we find ourselves in a long-term situation, it may be impossible to store enough food for survival. Having the skills, the knowledge, and the equipment to grow food yourself can really help stretch your stored food to sustain you much longer. Growing, raising, hunting, and foraging food are not really natural and instinctual skills for most people nowadays. So if you want to be self-sufficient in those areas, you need to practice and hone those skills on a regular basis. And if you are able to do these things on a scale sufficient for survival, you also need to know how to preserve some of that food for future use. This is a big part of the reason why we grow a garden. It's a lot of work and a lot of commitment, and while we really do enjoy it, we sometimes question whether it's worth everything that we put into it. But knowing that we could provide for ourselves in some capacity if we had to makes it worth it. Besides, it is nice eating produce you grew yourself, knowing exactly where it came from, how it was grown, and what was and was not put on it. We were away for about a week and a half during the peak harvest season here, which was not ideal, but we came home to tons of peppers of all sorts. Then we got our first frost warning, so we had to harvest all those peppers. And now, of course, it's a race to get them all preserved before they go bad so that we can enjoy them in one form or another throughout the year. I thought it would be fun to take you along and show you some of the ways that we're doing that. So let's get started and see how many different ways we can use and preserve this harvest. First and foremost, we knew we wanted to freeze dry a lot of these peppers. Freeze drying has so many benefits compared to other ways of preserving food. Number one is the nutrient retention. More of the vitamins and micronutrients in the food are preserved with freeze drying than any other form of food preservation. So freeze dried food is going to be the most nutritious food that you can store. Another benefit is the superior shelf life. But with home freeze drying, though, this is going to depend on a couple of things. One, that you have done the process properly and completely. It's not always as simple as you might think, and we've seen way too many people who get into their home freeze-dried foods down the road only to find that it wasn't truly dry and it's now ruined. It only takes one piece with moisture left in it to ruin a whole batch. The second factor with home freeze drying, and really with any kind of freeze-dried food, is how it's stored. Most commercial freeze-drying companies package their food in cans, which is ideal. There is equipment available to do this at home, but it's very, very expensive and it's very bulky, so most people don't do this with their home freeze-dried food. Most people are going to either use Mylar bags or glass mason jars with oxygen absorbers. If this is done properly, it should provide a similar shelf life to commercial products, which is about 25 to 30 years. Mason jars do need to be protected from light, which can really degrade your food, and Mylar bags need to be protected from rodents, which can easily chew through the Mylar. I've also seen lots of issues with faulty bags and faulty seals. So make sure you're buying reputable bags from a trustworthy source, testing your sealing method, and checking your stored items often. But as long as the storage methods are good and the food is properly processed, it's going to be tops for both nutrition and shelf life. For this batch of freeze-dried peppers, we wanted to do them diced because I use a lot of diced peppers in my cooking, and most of the freeze-dried peppers available commercially are in slices. They can be easily broken up into smaller pieces, but it is easier to just have them already diced if that's how you want to use them. I had a super busy couple of days with the kids, and we really needed to get started processing these peppers. So Mr. Wicked Prepared volunteered to do the dicing. This was a lot of peppers, and it took him quite a while with my little chopper. If I was doing it, I would have probably used my Breville peel and dice for this amount of peppers, but that takes a little bit of practice, and we decided that he should probably stick to the manual chopper. He chopped them and loaded them onto the freeze dryer trays and then got them pre-freezing. So we did finally get another freezer so that we have some dedicated space for our freeze dryer trays. We do have one large stand-up freezer and a very small chest freezer, but they were always completely packed to the gills, so we never had room for our freeze dryer trays. So now we have this freezer here, and we've got stacks of baskets over here with everything else in it. And then over here, this is where that little shelf is because the freezer parts are actually underneath. So there's a sort of a step up here that's higher than the rest of the freezer, and it's the perfect size for these freeze dryer trays. So we've got our 4 trays with our new lids, and the peppers are getting pre-frozen, all ready to go. Pre-freezing is going to save us time in the freeze dryer, so it's also going to save us some electricity because it's not going to take as long if we don't pre-freeze it in the freeze dryer itself, which is what we used to do because we did not have freezer space to put our freeze dryer trays. And this freezer was not new. This is used. It was gifted to us. I've got magnets down here where I've got labels telling me what's in all of the baskets, but it's really nice and we're super happy to have it. The nice thing about these Harvest Right lids is that these can actually be used as trays themselves. We've got 1 tray of the colored peppers mixed, and we've got 2 trays of the green peppers, and then 1 tray of this multicolored peppers. These are basically the ones that weren't fully ripe mostly, so they were more than one color on the same pepper. And then we've also got some purple peppers in there. All ready to go in the freeze dryer. And we've had our freeze dryer pre-freezing. It's actually ready now for the trays to go in. This is the first time we've actually used it in quite some time. We've just been way too busy to put the time in, and so we had to clean it all out. We cleaned it out with some vodka and just got it all cleaned out and ready to go. It's been a hot minute since we actually used our freeze dryer, so we forgot to add extra dry time when we started the cycle. We usually always add extra dry time whenever we start a cycle. It usually needs the extra dry time anyways, and it's not going to hurt the food. This way, if it finishes while we're not home or while we're sleeping or anything like that, it just kicks into the extra dry time. But this time we forgot, so we're just going to have to keep an eye on it until it finishes and add the extra dry time then. Maybe we'll check it just to see if it needs it, but it pretty much always needs it. Once we put the peppers in the freeze dryer, we knew it was going to be quite a while for them to finish, like probably more than 24 hours. So this was the perfect time to work on some of our other pepper projects. The first thing I knew I really wanted to do was make some pepper jelly. I love pepper jelly. It's great on crackers with cream cheese, which we do have canned cream cheese. This is one thing I wanted to make sure that I got done this year, and I wanted to use red, yellow, and orange peppers more than green ones. We didn't have a ton of those, so I thought I would cross this one off the list first. I'm going to start by cutting up these peppers, getting the seeds out. I need about 3 3/4 cups of these peppers, the sweet bell peppers, chopped up really finely. I definitely wouldn't want to be dicing this many peppers this small by hand. Let's see how many peppers this is. This cute little baby bell pepper, or mini bell, I guess. For this recipe, I'm going to need 3 3/4 cups of the bell peppers, and then I'm going to be using a 1/4 cup of jalapenos, also diced up really small. This is not going to be a very spicy jelly. This is going to be very mild, but if you want it spicier, you can absolutely adjust that by changing the ratio of the jalapenos to the bell peppers, as long as you keep it at a 4-cup total amount of peppers. You can also include more seeds in the jalapenos that you dice up, and that will help it be spicier also. On the contrary, if you don't want it to be spicy, take out as many seeds as you can. So I'm just going to cut these open, and I'm going to remove a good portion of the seeds so that this won't be too spicy. And then I'm just going to dice these up fine. Now I want a 1/4 cup of these jalapenos. You might want to use gloves when you're chopping your hot peppers. If I was doing a lot of jalapenos, I would put on some gloves. And if I was doing a spicier pepper, I would definitely put on some gloves. But that's up to you. Just be aware that when you're chopping hot peppers, you sometimes want to wear gloves because the oils in the peppers can burn your skin. But not only that, if you rub your mouth or rub your eyes afterwards with those oils on your hands, it's really going to leave you in a world of hurt. So definitely wash your hands after you cut the peppers if you don't wear gloves. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get my peppers into this heavy bottom pot. So I've got my 3 3/4 cups of chopped bell peppers and my 1/4 cup of jalapenos. Now I'm going to go ahead and add my other ingredients besides the sugar. So I'm adding 1 cup of apple cider vinegar. And I'm going to add my pectin. So I buy my pectin in bulk because sometimes I go on these kicks where I just am a jam making fiend and I love making jams and jellies. So I started buying my pectin in bulk. I did get this scoop. It's 90 cc's, which means it's the same as 6 tablespoons, which is the equivalent of 1 box of pectin from the store if you buy it in the individual boxes. Another thing you can do to measure 6 tablespoons besides measuring out 6 individual tablespoons is you can do a 1/4 cup plus 1/8 of a cup if you have 1/8 of a cup measure, because a 1/4 cup is 4 tablespoons and 1/8 of a cup is 2 tablespoons. So that's another way you can do 6 tablespoons. Or you could just do the 1/4 cup and 2 single tablespoons. I will link down below to where I buy my bulk pectin and the scoop that I use to scoop it in case you're interested in getting those. So this is just easier than measuring out 6 tablespoons. I'm going to go ahead and add my pectin. And this would be the same as like Sure Gel if you're buying just a box of pectin at the store. I'm going to give this a quick mix, and then I'm going to go get this onto the stove and bring this up to a rapid rolling boil. And at that point is when we will add the sugar. All right, I'm going to go ahead and put this on high. And I do have my water bath canner over here on the other burner with my jelly jars getting hot in the water, and then I do have some lids in a pot back here. And I just warm those. I don't do that for pressure canning with the ball lids because it tells you not to, but for water bath canning, I do quite often still warm my lids in water. Right, this is starting to boil. We want it to get to the point that I can't really stir it down. I can't stop the boil by stirring. So I think we're about there. So I'm going to go ahead and add the sugar, which is 5 cups of sugar that I already have measured out. I'm going to go ahead and stir this in, and then we've got to bring this back to a rolling boil again. And at that point, we're going to want to boil it for 1 minute. And then it should be ready to jar up. Now you could put a 1/4 teaspoon of butter in this to help keep the foam down, but I find that it foams anyway, so sometimes I don't bother to do that. All right, this is coming to a boil that I cannot seem to stir down. So this is a rolling boil. I'm going to go ahead and time 1 minute. All right, there's our 1 minute. I'm going to go ahead and get this off the heat and we'll get it jarred up. All right, I've got my jam here and I've got my ladle. I did scoop a tiny bit of foam off of this, but it's pretty difficult with the chunks of pepper that float on the top of the jam. So I don't think the foam's too bad. I'm not going to worry about it. I've got my towel here so I can get my hot jars out. I've got 1 3/4 pint jar because I was short on the 1/2 pint jelly jars. So I'm going to start with that one. And a good tip for this jelly, because the peppers all float on the top, we are going to scoop 1 scoop into each jar first so that the peppers get a little bit more evenly distributed. I like to use this canning funnel because it measures the headspace markings right on the funnel, which is pretty handy. Put 1 scoop in there. Problem with this method is I don't necessarily know how many jars it's going to make. It says it makes 6, but I find I don't usually get the same amount of jars that the recipe actually says for some reason. But I'm going to take another scoop out of here. I guess I'll put 1 extra scoop in this one since this one is bigger. Now I'm going to use my little jar because I don't think I will get 5 regular jars and 1 big jar. So I'm going to use this little jar. And if at the end I don't have enough jelly to fill, I can just dump the jelly from one of these jars into another one. But I do like to always have 1 1/4 pint jar in the canner because that way, if I have a little bit of jelly left over, it's not enough to fill a big jar, I don't have to have as much leftover jelly sitting in my fridge. Because sometimes if you're making a lot of jam, you end up with a lot of leftovers in there. All right, so that looks good with a 1/4 inch of headspace. So this actually ended up pretty spot on because this is 3/4 of a pint and this is a 1/4 pint. So this would be 1 pint altogether, the same as 2 of these 1/2 pints. So I guess I did pretty much end up with 6 of the 1/2 pint jars. So that's surprising to me. I never get exactly what the recipe calls for. I'm going to go ahead and wipe these rims pretty good because they're probably a little sticky, and then get on my lids. And I usually actually just dip a little bit of water right out of my canner or my lids so that it's super hot to melt away all the residue on the jars. Because I don't use vinegar. I stopped using vinegar on the rims of my jars. Oh, I feel like it was a few years ago. And I really, that and a few other changes I made really cut down on the amount of seal failures that I had. So I personally believe it's unnecessary, and I think it's actually better not to use the vinegar. But that's just my personal opinion. All right, so now I've got my lids here, and I've got my lid grabber. And I've also got some rings. The regular mouth rings will fit right into a 3/4 pint, a 1.5 pint mason jar really well. Now I'm going to tighten these up with my lid tightener here in just a minute. So I'm just going to get them all on first. Now I'm going to tighten down the lids. This is another tool that I started using right about the same time I stopped using the vinegar. That really, really helped me with seal failure. So I'm going to go ahead and put them into the canner as they're getting done. You can see this has a marking here. So it's basically like a torque wrench for canning jars. You just match up the 2 arrows, and that's what Ball considers finger tight. And it's been working for me. All right, so those just need to come up to a rolling boil, and then I'll turn it down and just keep it at a good boil, and I'm only going to process these for 5 minutes. All right, 5 minutes is up, so I'm getting these out of the canner. Now, because of the way that the pepper bits float in this jelly, we can turn it upside down and right side up and give it little shakes around as it's cooling to help distribute that. And here's how the jelly turned out. You can see that the bits of pepper are really well distributed throughout the jelly. So what I did was, once it started cooling down, it doesn't really do much while it's still really hot. But once it started cooling down, I started picking them up and flipping them upside down and shaking it just a little bit and then setting it like that for a while. And I just kept doing that back and forth. And especially when it got a lot cooler and it got much closer to setting up, it was really important to do that a little more often to make sure that it would not set up with all of the peppers floating at the top. So that was what I did, and I think it turned out really great that way. Next, I decided to can some of these peppers. Not pickled, just plain canned. This is going to be another easy way to get some peppers preserved to use for easy meals. Canned peppers are going to be soft, but they're going to be great for dishes that are cooked. My brother does a lot of freezing of peppers, but I try to avoid that because we never have a lot of extra freezer space, and I find that little things like bags of peppers tend to get lost in my freezer and never used. Canning is a preservation method that is a little bit more accessible to more people because I think probably more people have canning equipment than have freeze dryers at this point. And canning is a little less of an investment, both financially and space-wise, to get started if you don't already do it. One more thing about canning versus freeze drying. Freeze drying is great for prepping up to a disaster or a grid down emergency, but during a grid down situation, it's really not something that you could feasibly do. At least we have not yet found an emergency power source that can really reliably power a freeze dryer consistently over the amount of time that you would need it to. So freeze drying, great before a disaster. During a disaster, not so much. Whereas canning is something that you could do during a grid down using your emergency stove or even a wood stove or a fire. As long as you're using a stovetop manual canner, not with the canner that I'm going to be using for the peppers today. To do these peppers, I'm going to be using my digital canner here, my Nesco. I've been having a lot of issues with my stovetop canner. It needs a new gasket at the very least. And this is just super simple. I'm doing small jars of peppers. I can do a small batch. That's the one thing about these digital canners is they don't hold as much as a stovetop canner. But they are so simple to use. I really love using these. I know people who run 2 or 3 of these at one time rather than running larger batches in a stovetop canner because these are so simple to use. I do have a video all about how to use the Nesco digital canner, so I probably won't get into step-by-step details, and I will link that video down below in case you want to check that out. I was planning to use these tall 8-ounce jelly jars to can my peppers, but what I found was I could fit 7 of these around the bottom of the digital canner, but I couldn't fit a second row. So I decided to use these 8-ounce jelly jars. These hold the same amount. They're just a different shape. And with these, I was only able to fit 5 around the bottom of the canner, but I was able to fit a double row. So I was able to fit 10 jars total. For my canned peppers, I'm going to be using the larger grid to chop these, which is going to be this grid, if you can see the size. This machine comes with 2 different grid sizes, and I usually prefer the smaller one. But for canning, I really don't want them to just end up being mush and nothing else. So I'm going to use the larger grid. But I am just going to start by cutting my peppers up, getting the cores out, and just getting them ready to chop. Now I found this tool in my drawer, and I'm pretty sure if I remember correctly, this might be a pepper coring tool. So I thought I would give it a try and just see what it does. Huh. That actually worked pretty well. I don't remember where I got this. It might have even been like Temu. I'll have to take a look and see if I can figure it out. There is still a little bit of ribs and seeds in there to get out, but it did a pretty good job with most of it. That was actually kind of cool. I might use this some more. Of course, I don't think it's going to work on the small peppers like this. If I have a little bit of seeds just stuck to my pepper, what I usually do is just put it over my compost or my garbage, whatever I'm putting it in, upside down and just tap it with my knife, and that gets most of the seeds off. I don't know if everyone does that or if that's something I do, but that usually works pretty slick because I don't like to leave any of the seeds in these peppers, these sweet peppers. I am always all about looking for any kind of tools that can make things go a little bit more smoothly and a little bit more quickly, especially when I'm doing large amounts of something. But I am actually always all for making things go more quickly because I chronically am low on time. I never have enough time. Not enough hours in a day, I'm sure. You know how that goes. All right, let's see what we can chop. All right, so that got quite a lot of peppers in there. Now I know I can fit 10 jars, so I can fill up to 10 jars. So let's see how many jars this will do. It's supposed to leave an inch of headspace. Alright, so that gave us 4 jars. So I'm just going to keep doing this until I've filled all 10. You know, I think I might try 1 jar with the smaller grid, just so I'll know if it would work, how they would come out. Will they be too mushy? Will they completely disappear? I'm just going to try 1 jar's worth. Alright, we'll see what happens with that. Do the rest of them in the larger pieces. 1 more jar. So that's actually good to know. That was what I would consider one medium-sized pepper, and that filled this jar perfectly. So each one of these jars contains about one medium-sized pepper's worth of pepper. I have got some water right here heating up. I don't want it boiling, I just want it hot. And while I'm waiting for that, I'm going to add some canning salt into my jars. This is optional, but I'm just going to add a 1/4 teaspoon of salt to each jar. This isn't necessary for the preserving, it's just going to add a little extra flavor. So this is just a 1/4 teaspoon because they are half pints. So if these were pints, I would add a 1/2 teaspoon. Quarts, I would add a teaspoon. Of course, you could add less or none at all. All right, I think I've got all those jars. Now I'm just going to go ahead and use my canning funnel to add the hot water up to the 1-inch headspace mark. That's one of the things I love about this funnel, is that it has these headspace markings on it. So it's super handy. Now I'm just going to use a little plastic piece of a chopstick just to debubble these. Get the pepper all pressed down into the liquid. Of course, if we need to, we can adjust the liquid after the debubbling. So now that these are all set, I'm going to go ahead and use a little hot water on a clean cloth to wipe the rims. Right, now that that's done, I'm just going to add my lids. All right, these are ready to go in the canner. I'm going to go ahead and add my water to the canner, which is going to be 8 cups. I'm going to use hot water because I put hot water in my jars. And you want to use 8 measured cups. There are lines, markings inside of this bowl. I'm not sure if you can see, but they're not for the canning water. They're actually for rice cooking, because this can also be used as a pressure cooker. So that was my first 4 cups. And there's my final 4 cups. So I've got 8 cups of water in there now. I'm going to go ahead and load my jars. I actually did try putting a skinnier half-pint jar in that space in the middle there, but it didn't quite work. There wasn't quite enough space. All right, now I'm going to put my next level in. I cannot find the rack that works with this, so I'm going to try offsetting these jars. I think that should work. I know you can use canning rings for a rack, so I don't see why it wouldn't work to offset these jars. So hopefully we will have good luck with this. I'm going to go ahead and plug this in. Just like a regular canner, we want this to start on exhaust, so I'm going to set it to exhaust. High is for pressure canning. I want 30 minutes. Start. And we are off to the races. Now 30 minutes is the time for pints for peppers. When you're doing the smaller size jars, you're supposed to go with the pint size time. There is a way to figure a little bit less time for half pints, which I would rather do that because I don't want to overdo the peppers, but I can't remember the math to figure it out. I can't remember what the percentage is. So I'm just going to go with the 30 minutes. Okay, it just beeped and put on the E10, which means exhaust for 10 minutes. And I don't know if you can tell, but there is steam coming out of the exhaust. So when this has done its countdown for 10 minutes, it'll beep again and I'll know to close that exhaust, and then that's the last thing I have to do till it's done. All right, so it's on 0. It's been 10 minutes. Move that to airtight. And that's all I have to do. Now it's gonna keep going till it's done. Counting down. All right, and it's done. Now it does have to set for about an hour before we open it up, and we'll see how these came out. All right, it's been over an hour. Ooh, I hear pinging already. Well, let's see if we can get these out of here. It's gonna be kind of hard because of the way they're packed in. We can do this. All right, I'm going to go to bed and let these cool. All right, here's all the jars of peppers. They all sealed, everything sealed. You can see that they were kind of floating after they got taken out of the canner, but they all settled down. That tends to happen. This is my one jar of the smaller pieces of peppers, and actually, I think they look fine. Compared to the other jars, I don't think they look any worse. I'm hoping to make an American chop suey tonight, hopefully. If I get a chance, I will get some video of it to see how these work in a dish. And maybe I'll open this one with the small pieces and one of the larger ones just to see the difference. But I've got these 10 little jars, enough for a single meal each one, of peppers ready to go on the pantry shelf. I've washed them and now I just need to label them. Next, because we got a good bunch of jalapenos, but all of our tomatoes are gone by, so I can't do salsa, I want to do a batch of Cowboy Candy. Cowboy Candy is similar to pepper jelly in a lot of ways in that it's got that spicy sweetness and it's really good served over cream cheese on crackers. It is a little bit different though because it's not jellied and set with pectin, but it's more like candied jalapenos in a sweet, sticky syrup. Let's get started on these. So I have weighed out 3 pounds of jalapeno peppers. I almost thought about just doing them all because this is all that was left in this bucket after I weighed that out. But then I remembered we have some more of a different variety that were like multicolored that I can use for something else. So I'm going to save some of these. I will probably dehydrate some and make some more pepper jelly that's spicier than the other one I made. But 3 pounds of peppers is what we need here. These little brown or tan veins that they have on them is fine. That just has to do with the conditions when they were finishing ripening. I've heard that might make them more spicy. I don't know if that's true or not, but it doesn't matter. There's nothing wrong with them. I do have red and green here, which I think will be nice because I always tend to pull this out at Christmas. You can give it for Christmas gifts or serve it at Christmas parties. So I like using red and green actually. All right, so I've got my peppers that have been washed and I am just going to start by taking off the stem just by cutting a slice off the top. I might live to regret this, but I am not going to use gloves because I'm really just touching the outside of the pepper, cutting off the top, and that's it for now. And then I'm going to use my food processor to slice them. So I shouldn't have to do a whole lot of hands-on with the actual parts that would burn my hands. So I'm hoping that this will be sufficient, but I will put on gloves if I need to. I'm not going to be removing the seeds from these. That's just going to add a little bit of extra heat and flavor to the Cowboy Candy. All right, so that's our 3 pounds of peppers with the tops off. Now I'm going to get the food processor out so I can get these sliced real quick. So I need to set my slicing blade thickness to about 1/4 inch. So let's see. I'm just going to adjust this. They don't all have different thicknesses. This one you can adjust the thickness. So I'm just going to twist this and you will see the slicing thickness get bigger. I wanted about 1/4 inch. Now I've got to go ahead and get the slicing disc in. And now I can just put my peppers right down this way. I want the peppers to be sliced as if I had sliced them crosswise. So I'm just going to start by putting them down like this. And I can probably stick some in this way to fill in the spaces. All right, so let's just get this on here. All right, so you can kind of see the size of the slices. I think that is just about perfect. So I'm going to keep going and do the rest of them like that. All right, all done. Look at all those sliced peppers. This bowl holds 16 cups, I believe, and it is plumb full of sliced peppers. And that took me, it took me seconds, really. So if you don't have a food processor, you could probably use something like a salad shooter. If you have something like that, it would work similarly, or you could do them by hand. I don't think I would want to do this on a mandolin. I feel like that would be difficult, but however you have to slice them, just get them sliced into about 1/4 inch rounds. I'm glad I did not have to do this all by hand. If you do it by hand, please wear gloves. I've got the rest of my ingredients for the Cowboy Candy all ready here. So I've got 6 cups of white sugar, I've got 2 cups of cider vinegar, and then I've got the seasonings, which is a tablespoon of dried minced garlic or granulated garlic. You could use a half a teaspoon of turmeric and a half a teaspoon of celery seed. Turmeric, however you say it. Somebody corrected me on that on my last video. It's funny because I always said turmeric because that's the way it was spelled, but then I always heard people saying turmeric, so I decided that maybe I was saying it wrong. So I started saying turmeric, and it's probably a habit that's going to die hard now, but however you say it, half a teaspoon is what you need. All right, so I'm going to start by adding all of our other ingredients besides the peppers into this pot, which hopefully is big enough. This is a nice heavy bottomed pot here that will not scorch on the bottom. And so I've added my 2 cups of cider vinegar, 6 cups of white sugar, and now I'm just going to add my seasonings, which once again was a tablespoon of this dried minced garlic, half a teaspoon of turmeric, and half a teaspoon of celery seed. All right, I'm just going to mix this together. Then I'm going to get this on the heat, and I'm going to bring this up to a rolling boil, a full rolling boil, meaning a boil that can't be stirred down. And then I am going to reduce it to a simmer, and I'm going to simmer it for 5 minutes before I add the peppers. So it's just going to be the syrup that's going to be brought to a rolling boil and then simmered for 5 minutes. I'm going to get this onto the stove. All right, I'm putting this right over high heat so I can bring it up to a boil pretty quickly. It needs to come to a boil and then simmer. I should have mentioned I do have my water bath canner over here. It's got jars in it. I've got half pints and quarter pints, the little jelly jars. I've got a bunch of each so that I can decide what I'm going to put them in. So that is on the heat. So the jars are in the hot water and they're all hot, ready to go as soon as these peppers are ready to go in them. All right, so this is at a rolling boil. I'm going to go ahead and turn this down a little bit so I can simmer it for 5 minutes. All right, so this has been simmering for 5 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and bring this up to a boil again. And as soon as this is at a rolling boil again, I'm going to go ahead and add the peppers carefully because we don't want to splash this hot syrup or any of that pepper juice. All right, so we're boiling again. Now, I did not take out any seeds from these peppers, but I'm not going to go out of my way to make sure I scrape every last seed into this pot. So I'm just going to get the peppers out. Any seeds that stay in the food processor, I will just put in the compost. I'm going to stir these peppers in, and then I'm going to bring this up to boiling again. Look how pretty those are. I'm going to bring this up to a rolling boil again, and at that point, I'm going to turn it down once again and simmer it for 4 minutes. All right, I would say that's a rolling boil. I'm going to go ahead and turn this down and once again simmer this for 4 minutes. All right, that's been simmering for 4 minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and remove it from the heat, and we're going to get the peppers into the jars. So I'll see you over at the counter. All right, here are our peppers fresh off the stove. Now we're going to be using a slotted spoon to take the peppers out because right now we're leaving the syrup behind. We're going to work with that a little bit more before it goes into the jars with the peppers. So right now I'm just going to be getting my hot jars out of the canner and adding some peppers into the jars. Now we're going to be leaving a 1/4 inch headspace for this. This is one of the bigger jars. It's not really big, it's just a 1/2 pint jelly jar. Just depending on how much spicy stuff that you can eat at one time or how large of a party you're serving is going to depend on what size of jars you want. I think I prefer to do the little 1/4 pints because we can't always finish a whole bunch of super spicy stuff all at once. But if you're serving a big party or if your family really likes spicy things, then you probably could go through a bigger jar. All right, so now I can just I just got little bits left in here, not enough for a full jar. I can just go around and kind of add to the jars that look like they could use a little bit more. If I didn't quite get the 1/4 inch headspace, because it can be kind of hard to tell with these little jars as you're filling them. All right, I've pretty much got all the peppers out of the syrup. There's little bits left, but nothing that I can really Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and put the syrup back on the stove, and we're going to bring this up to a boil and boil it hard for 6 minutes. And then I'm going to take the syrup and fill the jars up to that 1/4 inch headspace with syrup. All right, it's starting to come to a boil. Once this is at what we would consider a hard boil, I'll time the 6 minutes. All right, I think that could be considered a hard boil. So we're just going to boil this for 6 minutes. I don't think I need to stir this the whole time. I really don't think this is at much danger of burning on the bottom or anything like that. We're just going to let it go. I will probably stir it occasionally. All right, this has been boiling for 6 minutes. It is time to get it off the heat and fill our jars with syrup. All right, so I have a small little ladle. It's not going to take a whole lot of the syrup to fill these jars. I've also got this plastic chopstick piece. It's broken, but this is what I can use to debubble these jars. Now I'm probably going to have plenty of this syrup left over. And that's normal. That's basically how it pretty much always is when you make cowboy candy. And that's fine because there's lots of other uses for this syrup. Some people will just keep adding more jalapenos into the same syrup and making more and more batches of cowboy candy. Some people like to use this as like a baste for meats. I like to use it to make spicy barbecue sauce. Sweet and spicy barbecue sauce. It's super yummy. So that is probably what I will do with this batch of syrup, whatever we have left over. All right, so now that I've got the jars all packed, I've got to wipe these rims because they're definitely going to be sticky. So we'll get the rims wiped clean and then get the lids on and get these in the canner. I've got some lids ready to go. I know they say you're not supposed to put them in hot water anymore. We're not supposed to have to, but I still do when I'm water bath canning, usually. Pressure canning, I do not. All right, now we'll get some rings on. I'm going to go ahead and start getting these into the canner. Get them out of my way. All right, that's the last one. All right, now that these are all in the canner, I've just got to bring them up to a boil, and I'm going to can these for 10 minutes for these 1/2 pints and 1/4 pints. Now with the rest of this syrup, because I do like to make barbecue sauce with it, I don't want the seeds in the barbecue sauce. I'm just going to strain these out. 2 cups is what I need for the barbecue sauce. I'm going to go ahead and put this through this strainer and see what we have. I'll just go ahead and strain the rest of it into a different container until I decide what I want to do with it. Do not throw this away. This is wonderful. Like I said, you can do barbecue sauce, you can do a baste, you can use it for lots of things. You can can this. If I don't end up using it in something right now, I will can up the remaining juice for later. All right, it's done. The 10 minutes are up. You do want to make sure you let these set for at least about a month before you break into them. That's going to help mellow out the heat and let the flavors come together. Finally, after about 40 hours in the machine, our freeze-dried peppers are finally finished. We use our thermal camera to test to make sure things are done. You're looking for cold spots. This is one of several ways that you can use to test if the food's really fully dry, which you want to make sure that you do carefully. We were satisfied that these peppers are finally dry, so I'm going to go ahead and jar them up in mason jars. All right, so these are ready to jar up. All right, so I'm going to get these into a jar. Somewhere we have a French fry scoop that works really great for scooping things off the trays and putting them down into the containers. I don't know where that is right now, so I'm just going to be doing it with, I don't know, I'm going to start with the spatula. I might move to a spoon. We shall see. All right, so now we're on to the next one. I don't think we're going to fit it all into this 1/2 gallon jar because it looks like that one tray filled it up more than half full. So let's see what we can do here. Now, obviously, you want to be careful about the area that you're packaging these up in. You want to make sure that there's not a lot of humidity and a lot of moisture in that room. So like I don't have any canners running right now or anything. Honestly, if we had a dedicated space for this, that would be much better. But we don't for now. We just have our kitchen, so that's where we do it. All right, so this is full up to the tippy top. I am going to put an oxygen absorber in this eventually, but for right now, I'm just going to get this lid on just so that it can stay as airtight as possible and as moisture free while I deal with all the rest of the peppers. This is what we got for peppers from the freeze dryer. We might end up doing another load in the freeze dryer if we have enough peppers left at the end. I do love having these on hand. Like I said, out of all the different ways you can preserve food, freeze drying really is about the best type of preserved food you can have. Well, it's been a good couple days of preserving food, and this is what we've got. We've still got quite a bit of peppers that we haven't gotten through. We've got some bell peppers, we've got some poblanos, we've got some more jalapenos. So we'll probably be doing some more of these. Growing your own food is definitely a lot of work, and preserving your own food is also a lot of work, but it's definitely worth it. Thank you for coming along as we tackled preserving all these peppers. I still have more to do. I'm not done, but I will get to them, and I didn't want to make this video last too long. You can follow along with us on Facebook if you want to see what we do with the rest of them. How many of these have you ever done, and what are your favorite ways to preserve peppers? If you made it all the way to the end of the video, pick a pepper emoji to leave down in the comments, and check out this video next to see all the ways I preserved bananas. I'm Jara with Wicked Prepared. Survive today, thrive tomorrow. We'll see you next time.